Don't run from me, the giant black wolf whispered in her mind. You're the first person who looked at me and saw something worth saving. Clara Whitmore froze with a towel in her hands. The cottage was silent except for the crackling fireplace and the heavy breathing of the enormous wolf standing in her kitchen. 5 minutes earlier, she had been certain she was helping a lost animal. Now she was wondering why a wolf sounded like a tired old king. Clara slowly lowered the towel. That is either the strangest thing I've ever heard, she said, or I finally worked too many late nights. The wolf blinked at her with golden eyes that carried far too much intelligence. Outside her small cottage, snow covered the pine trees of the northern valley. Clara had lived there alone for 3 years, caring for injured animals that other healers had given up on. Horses, birds, and even stubborn little forest creatures somehow found their way to her door. But she had never seen anything like this. The wolf was massive, nearly the size of a small horse, with thick black fur and the quiet presence of something that belonged in legends. Yet instead of fear, Clara felt something else. Sadness. You're not just hurt, she whispered. You're exhausted. The wolf looked away. That reaction told her more than words ever could. Clara sighed and pointed toward the wooden tub beside the fireplace. Fine. First, you're getting cleaned up. Second, you're not destroying my cottage. I don't care how impressive you are. The wolf stared at her as if no one had ever spoken to him that way. Somewhere deep inside him, Alexander Voss, the missing alpha king of Silverpine Pack, felt something he had forgotten existed. Peace. For years, every person around him had seen the crown, the power, the responsibility. They bowed to him. They feared disappointing him. They measured every word around him. But this Omega woman in a faded sweater and muddy boots simply looked at him like he was a stubborn animal who needed help. Not a king, not a weapon, just someone who was tired. Clara carefully washed the dirt from his fur, talking the entire time because silence made animals nervous. You know, for a giant wolf, you have a terrible attitude. The wolf's ear twitched. And you keep staring at my pantry. I know you're hungry. For the first time in weeks, Alexander almost smiled. Back at Silverpine Castle, the Pack Council was already spreading rumors. Their Alpha King had vanished during a dangerous political dispute, leaving his throne vulnerable. Some believed he had abandoned his duty. Others believed someone inside the pack wanted him gone. But none of them knew the truth. The most powerful Alpha in the country was hiding in a tiny cottage with an Omega who had no idea she was caring for the man everyone called their king. And as Clara placed a warm blanket beside the fireplace, the bond between them quietly awakened. Not with a command, not with a crown, but with a simple act of kindness that neither of them expected. By the third morning, Clara Whitmore had accepted one impossible fact. The giant black wolf living in her cottage was not planning to leave. She stood in the doorway holding a basket of fresh herbs and stared at the creature occupying nearly half of her small wooden floor. You do understand that most animals leave after they are healed, right? She asked. The wolf opened one golden eye and calmly rested his head back on the blanket she had made for him. Clara narrowed her eyes. That was not a yes. The wolf looked away. Somehow, that made her even more certain. You are impossible. If Alexander Voss had heard those words from anyone else, they would have sounded like an insult. From Clara, they sounded almost comforting. For years, people around him had chosen every word carefully. They feared his title. They feared his authority. They feared the power of the Alpha King. Clara did not fear him at all. She complained when he tracked mud across her floor, scolded him when he knocked over her firewood, and reminded him that being enormous did not give him permission to steal all the warm space near the fireplace. It was strangely peaceful, but Alexander knew peace never lasted long. Deep inside his mind, his wolf stirred whenever Clara came near. The connection between them was becoming stronger every day. It was not a force he could command. It was something quieter, something that felt like being understood without needing to explain. Clara did not know about mate bonds. She did not know the wolf beside her carried the soul of the man every pack member in Silverpine bowed to. She only knew that this stubborn animal had stopped acting like a wild creature and started acting like a very large, very dramatic house guest. You know, Clara said while preparing a bowl of soup, I have cared for injured animals before, but none of them had such strong opinions. The wolf looked offended. Exactly, she said. That face. You know you do it. A quiet sound escaped him. Almost a laugh. Clara froze for a second. Did you just laugh at me? The wolf immediately looked away. I cannot believe I am being judged by a wolf. While Clara returned to cooking, miles away at Silverpine Castle, the pack council continued searching for their missing leader. Ethan Caldwell stood before the council chamber with a calm expression, but his patience was wearing thin. The Alpha King did not abandon his pack, Ethan said. Lord Damien Crow folded his hands. Then where is he? The room fell silent. Damien continued. A king who disappears without explanation creates uncertainty. A pack cannot survive on rumors. Ethan knew there was truth hidden inside those words. That was what made Damien dangerous. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply turned fear into something reasonable. Alexander will return, Ethan said. But even he wondered how long they could hide the truth. Back at the cottage, Clara noticed something strange. The wolf always watched the road outside. Not like an animal waiting for danger. Like someone waiting for a responsibility he had left behind. She sat beside him near the window. You miss someone, don't you? She whispered. The wolf became still. Clara placed a hand gently against his fur. Whoever you are, you do not have to carry everything alone. For a moment, Alexander forgot about the throne, the council, and the enemies waiting for him. He only felt the warmth of the person beside him. Then, far beyond the valley, a distant call from Silverpine reached his senses. His pack was calling for their alpha. And for the first time in his life, Alexander did not know if he wanted to return to the crown or stay with the one person who had never asked him to wear it. The quiet of the cottage changed the moment Clara Whitmore noticed the wolf was no longer watching the forest. He was watching her. For 3 days, the giant black wolf had acted like a stubborn guest who had forgotten the meaning of goodbye. He followed her from room to room, waited beside the fireplace while she worked, and somehow always appeared whenever she carried food. Clara crossed her arms and looked at him. You know, for someone who was supposed to be resting, you are doing a lot of supervising. The wolf blinked slowly. That is not a denial. She smiled despite herself. She was beginning to understand him. The strange part was not that he seemed intelligent. The strange part was that she felt like he understood her too. Whenever Clara was tired, he noticed. Whenever she worried, he stayed close. Whenever she talked about the small dreams she never shared with anyone else, he listened. Alexander Voss had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Respect, protection, favor, power. But Clara wanted nothing. She did not know he was the Alpha King. She did not care about his title. She only cared that a lonely creature had found its way to her door. That was what made the growing bond between them so dangerous. At Silverpine Castle, the pressure inside the pack continued to rise. Ethan Caldwell stood in the council chamber, facing a room filled with powerful wolves who were used to having answers. The search continues, Ethan said. Lord Damien Crow leaned back in his chair. And yet our alpha remains missing. His voice stayed calm, almost gentle. That was what made him difficult to challenge. The pack needs certainty, Ethan. A leader cannot disappear and expect everyone to wait forever. Ethan looked around the chamber. He saw fear. He saw ambition. He saw people wondering if Alexander would truly return. What they did not know was that their alpha was alive. He was simply somewhere no one expected. In a small cottage at the edge of the northern valley. That evening, Clara sat outside with the wolf beside her. The snow had started falling again, covering the wooden fence and the old path leading into the woods. You keep looking that way, she said softly. Like you are waiting for someone to find you. The wolf became still. Clara studied his expression. You know, I think you are not lost. She paused. I think you are hiding. Alexander felt the truth of her words settle between them. He had hidden from enemies. He had hidden from politics. He had even hidden parts of himself from his own pack. But somehow, this Omega who wore old sweaters and apologized to injured birds had seen through him in less than a week. Clara reached out and gently touched his fur. Everyone deserves one place where they do not have to pretend. The mate bond inside Alexander responded instantly, not with force, but with warmth. A quiet certainty. A feeling that this moment mattered. Then a sudden sound came from the forest. Not a threat. A message. Another wolf from Silverpine stood beyond the trees, carrying the mark of the royal pack. Clara looked at the stranger, then back at the giant black wolf beside her. The visitor lowered his head. My king, the wolf called. Clara froze. Her eyes slowly moved back to the animal she had been feeding, bathing, and arguing with for days. The impossible thought finally entered her mind. The wolf was not just special. He was someone everyone was searching for. And the secret inside her little cottage was about to change everything. My king. The words echoed through Clara Whitmore's small cottage, louder than the crackling fire, louder than the winter wind outside. Clara stared at the massive black wolf beside her, then slowly looked back at the stranger standing beyond the trees. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Clara pointed at the wolf. You. The wolf avoided her eyes. Clara narrowed hers. You are telling me the giant animal I have been feeding soup to is the Alpha King? Alexander Voss had faced rival leaders, political challenges, and the weight of an entire pack depending on his decisions. None of those moments made him feel as exposed as standing in Clara's cottage while she remembered every time she had complained about his attitude. The royal wolf lowered his head slightly. Clara crossed her arms. You let me tell you that you had a bad personality. Alexander shifted back into his human form, wearing the dark cloak Ethan had brought from Silverpine. His expression was calm, but his eyes showed something rare. Embarrassment. You were not wrong. Clara stared at him. The man standing before her was nothing like the animal she had cared for. He carried himself like someone born to command. His presence filled the small room, the kind of presence that made people stand straighter without realizing it. Yet she still saw the same tired eyes. The same person who had rested beside her fireplace because he had nowhere else he wanted to be. You are really Alexander Voss, she said quietly. The Alpha King of Silverpine. He nodded. I should have told you sooner. Clara looked away for a moment. Not because she was afraid of him, because she was trying to understand everything at once. The wolf she had trusted was real. The connection she felt was real. But the secret was bigger than she expected. Why did you stay here? She asked. Alexander did not answer immediately. Kings were trained to choose careful words. But Clara had never asked him for a royal answer. She asked him for the truth. Because here, I was not a king. His voice softened. I was just someone who was tired. That answer surprised her more than anything else. At Silverpine Castle, the search for Alexander had reached a turning point. Ethan returned with the news that the council was preparing an emergency gathering. Lord Damien Crow was gaining influence, convincing pack leaders that the Alpha King had abandoned his responsibilities. You need to return, Ethan told Alexander. The pack needs you. Alexander looked toward Clara's cottage. For the first time in his life, duty and desire felt like they were pulling him in opposite directions. Clara noticed. You should go, she said. Alexander looked at her. You want me to leave? She gave a small smile. I want you to stop running from what you are responsible for. Those words stayed with him. She was not asking him to choose her over his pack. She was asking him to become the leader he was meant to be. Before they left, Alexander paused at the cottage door. Clara. She looked back. Thank you. She smiled slightly. For what? The soup or the lectures? For the first time, the Alpha King actually laughed. The sound surprised both of them. But as they traveled towards Silverpine, neither noticed the hidden watcher among the trees. Someone had seen the bond between them. Someone who understood exactly how dangerous that connection could become. Because an Alpha King with a true mate bond was powerful. But an Alpha King who had found someone he trusted completely was almost impossible to control. The halls of Silverpine Castle had never felt smaller to Alexander Voss. He had walked through those doors countless times as the Alpha King, with every guard lowering their head and every member of the pack making space for him. But this time was different. This time, he carried a secret that could change everything. Clara Whitmore walked beside him, quiet but steady. She did not look impressed by the marble floors, the towering banners, or the hundreds of eyes watching them enter. She simply looked around and whispered, Your castle is much bigger than your cottage. Alexander glanced at her. That is your observation? Clara nodded. Yes. Also, your castle has too many rooms and not enough warmth. Ethan Caldwell, walking behind them, almost smiled. Very few people in Silverpine would dare say something like that to their Alpha King. Clara did not say it to challenge him. She said it because she meant it. And somehow, that made it impossible for Alexander to be offended. The moment they entered the council chamber, the atmosphere changed. The pack leaders were waiting. Their eyes moved from Alexander to Clara, and then back again. They saw an Omega from a remote cottage standing beside their king. They saw someone who did not belong in their world. Lord Damien Crow was the first to speak. Your return is welcome, Your Majesty. But I believe there are questions that require answers. Alexander remained calm. Ask them. Damien looked at Clara. Who is she? Clara felt the weight of the room. In the cottage, she had been the person who told a giant wolf to stop stealing her blanket. Here, she was standing among the most powerful members of the Silverpine Pack. But she did not step back. My name is Clara Whitmore, she said. I am a healer. Damien gave a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. A healer from outside the royal circle. Alexander noticed the judgment immediately. His wolf reacted before he did, a quiet warning beneath his control. Clara gently touched his arm. The small gesture surprised him. She was calming him, not because she had to, but because she understood him. The room noticed. And that was exactly what Damien feared. The pack cannot be guided by emotion, Damien said. A king must make decisions based on duty. Alexander looked at him. You are correct. A king must protect what matters. Damien expected him to distance himself from Clara. Instead, Alexander continued. And that includes the people who remind him what he is protecting. Later that evening, Clara stood alone near the castle gardens. Everything around her felt unfamiliar. The voices, the traditions, the expectations. She wondered if she had made a mistake by following Alexander back. You are thinking about leaving. Alexander's voice came from behind her. Clara turned. I am thinking about whether I belong here. He stepped closer but stopped at a respectful distance. Clara, you were the only person who saw me when I was not wearing a crown. She looked down. That does not mean I understand your world. Maybe not, he said. But you understand me. That matters more than you know. For a moment, neither spoke. The bond between them felt stronger than before, not because of magic, but because of trust. Then the peace was interrupted. A messenger rushed into the garden carrying a sealed letter from the Northern Territories. A group of pack members had discovered evidence that someone inside Silverpine had been hiding information about Alexander's disappearance. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was real, and whoever had planned it was still inside the castle. The sealed letter sat in the center of the council table like a warning no one wanted to touch. Alexander Voss stared at it quietly while every member of the Silverpine Pack waited for his reaction. The message was simple. Someone inside the royal circle had hidden information about his disappearance. Someone had known where he was. Someone had allowed rumors about his failure to spread. Clara Whitmore stood near the back of the chamber, watching the room carefully. She could feel the tension before anyone spoke. This was not just a disagreement between leaders. This was a pack struggling with trust. Lord Damien Crow folded his hands. Your Majesty, we should proceed carefully. Accusations without proof can damage the stability of the pack. Alexander looked at him. Interesting words from someone who benefited from my absence. The room went silent. Damien kept his expression calm, but Clara noticed the smallest change in his face. A pause. A hesitation. A moment where the mask slipped. Alexander noticed it too. For years, he had trusted instincts built from experience. But recently, Clara had taught him something important. Sometimes the smallest details revealed the biggest truths. Later that night, Alexander and Ethan reviewed the information privately in the Royal Archive. Clara joined them after examining the letter. Ethan looked surprised. You found something? Clara nodded. Not in the words. In the paper. Alexander raised an eyebrow. The paper? She smiled slightly. I restore old things. People forget that objects remember what happened to them. She explained that the letter had been handled by someone wearing a rare cedar oil used only by high-ranking council members. There were only a few people in Silverpine who had access to it. Ethan looked at Alexander. That narrows the list. Alexander looked toward Clara. A few weeks ago, he would have dismissed something like this as impossible. Now he trusted her judgment without hesitation. That trust was exactly what worried the people who wanted control over him. The next morning, the castle felt different. Rumors moved faster than footsteps. Some pack members whispered that Clara had too much influence over their alpha. Others claimed she was using their bond to gain power. Clara heard every word. She pretended it did not bother her, but Alexander saw through it. You are quiet, he said as they walked through the garden. Clara looked at the frozen flowers along the path. I am trying to understand something. What? Your world has rules for everything. Who can speak? Who can lead? Who belongs beside you? She looked at him. I do not know if there is a place for someone like me. Alexander stopped walking. Clara. His voice softened. The first time I met you, I was not a king. I was a wounded wolf hiding in the snow. You did not ask about my title. You asked if I was hungry. She smiled faintly. You were very dramatic. A small smile appeared on his face. I was. For a moment, the pressure of the throne disappeared. But peace never stayed long. Before they could continue, a royal guard arrived with urgent news. Another piece of evidence had been discovered. The person who interfered with the search for Alexander was connected to the council itself. And now Damien Crow was calling for a formal pack gathering. He wanted the entire Silverpine pack to decide whether Alexander was still worthy of leading them. Clara looked at Alexander, seeing the weight return to his shoulders. The king was coming back. The wolf inside him was ready. But this time, he would not face the challenge alone. The great hall of Silverpine Castle had never been this quiet. Hundreds of pack members gathered beneath the royal banners, waiting for the Alpha King to speak. But this time, the attention was not only on Alexander Voss. It was on the Omega standing beside him. Clara Whitmore felt every stare. She had spent most of her life caring for animals in a small cottage where the biggest challenge was convincing a stubborn goat to stop eating her garden. Now she stood in front of an entire pack that expected perfection from their leaders. Alexander noticed her hands tighten slightly. You can leave if this becomes too much, he whispered. Clara looked at him. And let everyone believe I ran away? A small smile crossed his face. That sounds like something you would say. Because it is true. For a brief moment, the tension disappeared. Then Lord Damien Crow stepped forward. The pack has respected your return, Your Majesty. But leadership requires more than personal feelings. His eyes moved toward Clara. The question before us is whether your decisions are still guided by duty. The message was clear. Damien was not attacking Clara directly. He was questioning Alexander's judgment. The entire pack understood what was happening. This was not about an Omega from a cottage. This was about control. Alexander stepped forward. You believe my bond makes me weaker. Damien remained calm. I believe a king must think beyond himself. Alexander looked around the hall. He saw warriors, healers, families, and elders. The people he had sworn to protect. For years, I believed being an alpha meant carrying every burden alone, Alexander said. I believed asking for help was weakness. The room stayed silent. Clara watched him carefully. This was the first time she had heard him admit that. But a leader who refuses to listen will eventually stop understanding the people he leads. Some members of the pack exchanged uncertain looks. They had expected anger. They had expected a display of power. They did not expect honesty. Damien quickly changed direction. Then prove that this bond is not a weakness. Prove that this Omega stands beside you because she deserves to, not because your instincts demand it. Clara felt the pressure of the moment. She knew what he was trying to do. He wanted Alexander to choose between the pack and her. But Alexander did something unexpected. He turned to Clara. Tell them yourself. She looked surprised. What? You are not my possession. You are not my weakness. If they want to know who you are, they should hear from you. Clara stepped forward. Her voice was calm, even though her heart was racing. I never wanted this position. I never wanted a crown. I did not meet Alexander as a king. I met him as someone who needed help. The hall became completely still. I stayed because he was kind when no one was watching. I stayed because he listened. I stayed because behind the title, there was a person. For the first time, some members of the pack lowered their judgmental expressions. But Damien was not finished. He presented a final accusation. A report claiming Clara had manipulated the Alpha King's decisions from the moment they met. Alexander read the document carefully. Then Clara noticed something familiar. The ink. The paper. The same signs she had seen before. Someone had created the report using the same materials connected to the hidden betrayal. The truth was closer than anyone realized. And now the pack was about to discover who had been pulling the strings from the beginning. The great hall remained silent as Clara Whitmore stepped closer to the table where the accusations had been placed. Every member of the Silverpine pack was watching her. Some with curiosity, some with doubt, some waiting for her to prove them right. Clara picked up the report carefully. She did not read the words first. She looked at the paper itself. Alexander noticed immediately. You recognize something. Clara nodded slowly. Yes. Lord Damien Crow's expression changed for the first time. Only slightly. But Clara saw it. This report was not written by someone trying to expose me, she said. It was written by someone trying to create a story. A few pack members exchanged confused looks. Clara turned the page. The ink is mixed with the same cedar oil used in the earlier documents. The paper comes from the private council archive, and the writing style matches the reports used to hide information about Alexander's disappearance. Damien stepped forward. That is a serious accusation from someone with no official position. Clara looked at him calmly. You are right. I do not have an official position. She paused. But I do know when someone is trying to make an old story look new. The room became tense. Alexander watched her with quiet pride. Months ago, Clara would have stood in the corner of a room like this and hoped nobody noticed her. Now she was standing before the strongest members of the pack and speaking with confidence. Not because she wanted power, because she believed the truth mattered. Ethan Caldwell moved forward with the evidence he had collected. The documents connecting to the Alpha King's disappearance were all approved by members of the council. But one name appears repeatedly. He placed another file on the table. Lord Damien Crow. A wave of whispers moved through the hall. Damien remained composed. Circumstantial evidence. Alexander looked at him. You knew where I was. Silence. You allowed the pack to believe I abandoned them. Another silence. Damien finally looked away. I protected the stability of Silver Pine. Alexander's expression hardened, but his voice stayed calm. By removing the leader you believed was too emotional. Damien did not answer. Clara understood then. The betrayal was not about hatred. It was about control. Damien believed he was saving the pack by choosing order over trust. But he had forgotten something important. A pack was not built only on strength. It was built on loyalty. Alexander turned to the gathered members. I could punish him immediately. I could use my authority as Alpha King. Everyone waited. But leadership is not about proving that I have power. It is about proving that I can use it responsibly. The hall stayed quiet. Even Damien looked surprised. Alexander continued. Lord Damien will answer for his choices. But Silverpine will not become a place where fear decides everything. Clara looked at him and saw the difference. The wolf she had found in the snow had changed. He was still powerful, still an alpha. But now he understood that being strong did not mean standing alone. Later that evening, Clara stood on the castle balcony overlooking the valley. The snow-covered forest reminded her of the small cottage where everything had started. You are thinking about leaving again, Alexander said as he approached. Clara smiled slightly. You are getting better at noticing things. He stood beside her. I had a good teacher. For a moment, they simply watched the lights of Silverpine below. Then Alexander spoke quietly. When I first came to your cottage, I thought I was hiding from my enemies. Clara looked at him. And now? He smiled. Now I think I was finding the place where I could finally stop hiding from myself. But beyond the castle walls, not everyone accepted the new balance of power. Some members of the pack still questioned the bond between their Alpha King and an unknown Omega. The conflict was not over yet, because the final test would not come from the council. It would come from the entire pack watching to see what kind of leader Alexander truly was. 3 months had passed since the day Silverpine learned the truth. The castle was still the same. The stone walls still stood tall. The royal banners still moved with the winter wind. But something inside the pack had changed. The Alpha King no longer ruled from a distance. He walked among his people. He listened before making decisions. He asked questions instead of assuming he already had every answer. And beside him was Clara Whitmore, the Omega from the small cottage who had somehow changed the way an entire pack understood strength. Not everyone accepted the change immediately. Some still whispered that an Alpha King should have chosen someone with a royal background, someone who understood court traditions, someone who looked like they belonged beside a throne. Clara heard those whispers, but she no longer let them define her. One morning, she stood in the castle garden, caring for an injured hawk brought by the royal scouts. Alexander watched from a distance with a small smile. Ethan noticed. You know, months ago, no one would have believed the Alpha King would spend his morning watching someone treat a bird. Alexander looked at him. Months ago, I would not have believed I could be happy doing exactly that. Ethan smiled. She changed you. Alexander looked toward Clara. No, she reminded me who I was before I forgot. Later that day, the entire Silverpine pack gathered once more. This time, there was no accusation, no challenge, no hidden agenda. Alexander stood before them, not only as their king, but as their leader. A pack is not strong because one person carries everything, he said. A pack is strong because everyone has a place. Every voice matters. Every person has value. His eyes moved toward Clara, including those who were once ignored. The meaning was clear. For generations, many Omegas had been treated as less important because they did not hold traditional power. Alexander changed that. Not because Clara asked him to. Because he finally understood that leadership without compassion was only control. Clara stepped forward when the pack recognized her officially as a trusted healer and advisor. She did not receive the title because she was the Alpha King's mate. She received it because she had earned respect before anyone knew who she was standing beside. That difference mattered. After the ceremony, Clara returned to the cottage one final time. The little wooden home looked exactly the same. The fireplace, the old table, the blanket where a giant black wolf had once refused to leave. Alexander stood in the doorway, looking around. I still cannot believe you told the Alpha King he was too dramatic. Clara smiled. You were dramatic. I was injured. You were lying on the warmest spot near the fire. Alexander tried to look serious. He failed. The wolf inside him clearly disagreed. Clara laughed softly. And that was the moment Alexander realized something important. The crown had never made him complete. The throne had never made him worthy. The thing that made him a true leader was the ability to care, to listen, and to choose what mattered even when the world expected something else. Years later, stories would still be told about the Alpha King of Silverpine. Some would talk about his strength. Some would talk about his leadership. But the story people remembered most was about a lonely king who was found in the snow by an Omega who never saw a crown. She only saw someone who needed kindness. And because she did, an entire pack learned that true power was not about standing above others. It was about standing with them.